when you do actually meander, you end up putting pieces together that are like much bigger. I ended up putting together Romanian and Irish and Scandinavian lore and fairy traditions. So you can interact with the Norse Alfar, you can interact with the Irish is she, can interact with various types of fairy beings, even if you're across the ocean and far away from Europe, where the cultures where they originated. I was able to gather from both Irish and Romanian fairy lore. It's this very, very old, ancient deity, so old that's really hard to pinpoint the origin. There is a respect. This is not something that you talk lightly about. These are powerful beings to be reckoned with. They have an influence on people's lives, on your luck. Everything your life depends upon. They have a say into it.
Hello and welcome to the Pagan Portal Podcast, produced by Moonbooks Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. Very pleased to welcome today fairy witch, medicine woman, and all manner of other wonderful things. Daniela Simina, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And now that I feel a little bit intimidated by that all wonderful things, it's going to take me a second, for my brain to catch up. So that I'll be properly able to introduce myself. But yes, I'm delighted to be here. I love talking about my work, and it is always a privilege to share time and space with people at Moonbooks.
It shows from your enthusiasm how much you are passionate about your subject, which is lovely to see. So shall we start with you, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I think that's going to be a useful thing to do, to give a little bit of a preview of who actually I am. Who is the person writing all these books and all these things, all fairy related, and what are my credentials actually to do so? I'll start by saying that I am an author, writing for Moonbooks, statement of the obvious, and I will take this opportunity to express my endless gratitude for Moonbooks to create the space in my life where through writing I can be who I am, really express myself and be authentic to myself, something that not everybody has the privilege in their own lives to really live and work in a professional setting, being who they are. So thank you very much.
I second that, absolutely.
I am a teacher. I also like to share and teach. And when I say teacher, please don't take it as this very rigid role. Oh, I am here as an authority and I will tell you how to do things. It's more like when you're a child, and you have a new set of toys. And yes, you play by yourself and everything is cool and you can imagine and you can have all these fantastic adventures to take you on, just you and your beloved new toys. But then when you have friends coming in and joining and you start sharing with them and play together, and together you create new games and new adventures, and it's all more fun and more interesting, and it creates a space for growth. So I see my role as a teacher when I share about fairies and fairy folklore and lore, and both personal things and those that I researched, as this way of sharing my toys with other people out there who are in search for help or guidance or just partners to be together on this journey. Because yes, working with fairies as it comes across from lore and folklore, it is very much of a solitary path, in the sense that not everyone's experiences and interaction with the good folk, by the good folk I mean fairies, it's not an exact 100% match in between how this interaction translates and how it influences actual real life, For the practitioner, nevertheless, there is a huge common ground and a lot of shared knowledge coming from lore and folklore that stood the test of time. So researching, nobody can cover like every bit of everything. And this is where the beauty of partnership and sharing information with others and teaming up in deciphering and journeying, into sometimes uncharted territory. This is where the beauty lies. So this is where I see myself as a teacher, both as a guide on those paths that not everybody walked in before. For example, if I'm taking someone, through Romanian fairy lore, that would be uncharted territory for most people. I had the privilege to grow immersed into that. So yes, I can be a little bit of a road opener, path opener there. But then there are other areas where my familiarity with the content and with what's happening fairy-wise comes only from my research. And there's where I utmostly appreciate when somebody who's native to that specific culture or had direct experience with beings from that culture steps in and said, hey, I have this. Oh yeah, let's research, put things side by side and see what do we get. So that would be me in a nutshell.
Probably the most perfect description of a spiritual teacher that I've ever heard. Brilliant. That's it. That's all we need.
We had a great start.
Brilliant. So obviously today we're going to be talking a lot about the fair folk and the fairies. Is that your soul spiritual pathway?
I like this question because what is my spiritual pathway? I like this question because you have no idea how many times I am asking myself, if somebody would ask me to describe my spiritual pathway, what would I say? What would I say? And yes, the constant on my path is being the fairy element, because as I mentioned before, I grew up with it. It was there even before I was even clearly aware what was that. But my path per se was quite meandering. And sometimes I feel envious of people who just drop on it when early on in their lives and then, oh, this is my path. And they stick onto it and, keep on marching forward. That wasn't always my case. So while I feel I am a pagan, I've been a pagan for a long time. My current pathway is spiritual pathway is that of a heathen. So I'm very much into the Norse shamanic. But my path actually lies at the intersection in between Norse and Irish. So that would be where my spiritual path is now, with the fairy element in the foreground, because as they have always been, they're still driving, the journey. They're still in the lead. So yeah, that's what my path is now. Very much.
I think most of our pathways do that, don't they? They're never a straight line,
and it would be boring,
So what makes it interesting?
Boring.
Yeah, you got to keep it interesting.
Simple in a sense. There's so much to learn. Whatever path you're on, straightforward or meandering. There's always the I need to know more and I need to know more. But when you do actually meander, you end up putting pieces together that are much bigger. Like I ended up putting together Romanian and Irish and Scandinavian lore and fairy traditions.
Brilliant. Yeah, it works. Everyone's journey is personal, isn't it? And it has to work for you. So I'm going to ask a big question to start off with, as today is going to be full of fair folk. What is a fairy? What do we class as a fairy?
If I am
short answer.
So I know that the word fairy conjures up different images in the mind of different people depending on their background, culture, affinity for one type of source material versus another. So when I talk about fairies in general, and I want to give a description like this sweeping broad term, I would say an otherworldly being inhabiting the dimension that is contingent to our consensus reality. These two dimensions oftentimes bleed into one another, and we have lots of accounts of humans ending up in fairies and lots of accounts of fairies slipping into the human world and having interactions of various degrees with humans. Generally speaking, by fairy, still as an umbrella term, I understand humanoid-looking beings, various sizes, tall, short. I will not go as far as denying, if you saw something in light and you believe it was a fairy, that's not a fairy, because we have actual accounts from people who saw fairy more like small size beings. But my lean is into older folklore, and it's not just lean into older folklore, it's also my own lived experience interacting with beings that can be like 7 foot tall down to about 8 foot. When I say fairy, again, think of it please as an umbrella term that shelters a broad variety of beings. Same as if I say humans. Okay, humans from where? Because humans from Africa look different. They're still humans, but they look different from humans of Europe, and they look different from humans in different parts of Asia. So we're all at a common denominator as humans, but we're gorgeously beautiful in our own diversity, shaped by the geography and shaped by the culture where we come from. So with the fairies, I tend to see it a little bit in the same way. The diminutive ones side by side with the taller ones. And this depends a lot on what is the area of concern of the fairy practitioner or the person who seeks to interact with them. Because you can be quite specific about who you can invite in your life and in your proximity. And this goes the other way. You also have to be aware who naturally inhabits your environment and interact respectfully with both who you want to bring in and with who is already there. Because yes, they're all fairies, but they're different kind of fairies.
That's how I understood it. So I'm glad I'm on the right track.
Are we?
I don't work with the world of fairies, so I do find it all fascinating. But that explanation is how I understood it. So I'm glad that I've understood it correctly. Now, you did mention earlier the connection between Irish and Romanian. That's your Where Fairies Meet book, isn't it? That's the subject of that book. What prompted not only writing of the book, but actually making that connection?
The story goes way back. So I'll try to give it in its short version, unless you want to write another book now, side by side in audio format.
You go for it.
No. So when I start to approach Romanian fairy lore with a more scholarly mindset, because up to a certain point in my life, I was very much into the experiential, go talk to your neighbor, or, when you travel to this location in the countryside, go talk to the medicine woman over there. So it was very much, or just go talk to grandma, the simplest, shortest road to fairy knowledge. So at some point in my life, I became interested into the more scholarly approach to fairy, working with fairies. And I started with Romanian. And inevitably, I came across Irish fairy lore. Now, coincidence, by then, I was also quite immersed into Irish paganism. My paganism at that point in time, talking, 10 years back or something like that, was very much Irish-focused. So, starting to read about the Irish fairy lore, and I'm having this moment, like being awestruck how strong the parallels are. And now, bear in mind, Romania is all the way to the eastern side of Europe, one step more and you get into Asia. And Ireland is diametrically opposed in terms of geography. And yes, I understand
we're
certainly not neighbors. And now I understand migration happening, sweeping through Europe, Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, early Iron Age. But what really hit me wasn't the lore and the seeds that obviously hint at things that happened and stories being told hundreds of years ago. What hit me is how fairy occurrences are described in both Irish folklore and Romanian folklore today. So these are things that late 19th century, early 20th century, and still today what happens, those who interact with fairies tell the same stories. So this is not just lore that move from one side to the other with people migrating across Europe. This happens today. So there is a parallelism that, yes, it is rooted in ages back, but it continues. So it's not that we have a body of lore that at some point in time was similar. No, we have a body of lore that was similar, but the parallels are very strong into today. So since I am one who works with fairies, I became, and my focus back then was Irish. I was like, I am very much intrigued to learn more. And here is where the Numinos comes in. I was planning, so went to Ireland more than once. I had the chance. And usually when when you go to Ireland, they don't just jump forward, start telling you fairy stories. It's because there is a respect in the living culture. There is a respect. This is not something that you talk lightly about. These are powerful beings to be reckoned with. They have an influence on people's lives, on your luck, on your everything your life depends upon. They have a say into it. So I was amazed how I would just come across people who would open up the conversation spontaneously and share with me. I was close to Lukur, I was close to Knock Anya, and people, Anya, Ferry Hill, and I encountered people who start telling me the stories, and let's go about have you been up the hill? No, I haven't. Oh, come with us, we're going up the hill, and telling me everything. And were some things that I read about, but to hear them told by people in the living culture, I'm getting goosebumps as I'm talking about this. It was like very, very special. Part one. Part two, I'm coming back, and I had never presented to a conference before. And some years ago, we had this Mystic South conference in Atlanta. And I'm like, I'm going to present to Mystic South. And I'm going to write this paper, parallels between Irish and Romanian fairy lore. And it started as a conference paper. 24 hours before the deadline, I had a fairy-related occurrence. And I was told, you are not going to present this. And I'm like, you are joking, right? Because I have less than 24 hours before the submission deadline. And they were like, you don't worry about that. This is going to be a book, the parallels. You have to make it a book and dive deeper into it. And I'm like, and what about the conference? And the answer was, oh, never mind. Tomorrow morning, you'll know what to write about. Woke up in the morning, sat on in front of the computer, and
please tell me you did.
And in that moment, the whole abstract for what I was supposed to present comes into my mind. I'm typing it quickly, hit send without even rereading what I wrote, and then start questioning what the heck was in my mind, because at that point I had no resume, nothing, no CV to propose me to be accepted in such a big of an event as Mystic South is. I'm like, okay, here I am, a nobody. I just blurted out something about fairies, and now I expect, sure enough, a few days later, I was invited to present. So, and this is how it began. Like me putting more out there in the capacity as a teacher, as I said, and a guide. This is my experience. Anybody who would like to, share their experience so I can make our joint journey more interesting and more useful, more productive. So, and this is how the book came about. I started writing it, and I think it took me, 8 weeks to write it. So writing it wasn't the research that went into it, because it wasn't just telling about my things. It was also backing up my claims with examples and, with the work of other people that have been scholarly involved with fairies for ages. So this is how the first book came about.
Now, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the book. I'd never even thought about connecting the Irish fairy traditions with any other fairy traditions, to be honest. So it was fascinating. There are some interesting subjects, and one of those is you include sports. And I'd never thought of fairies and sports. It's not a connection I'd ever made. Why sports?
This is one of the parallels that shows parallels, but not an exact overlap. Like the whole idea, the fairy mindset, if I can speak about fairy mindset, behind sports is the competition. And there's a degree of fierceness. I was reading Eddie Lanahan, and I also talked to people in Ireland about fairies competing in sports, and it has the same degree of fierceness and intensity as if they were doing battle against each other. So it becomes a really, so it's that really, we have to win. So put a little pin on that. In Romania, we do not have that much about fairies competing in sports. There are like isolated encounters of isolated examples of them competing in sports, especially wrestling, which is more like a one-on-one. But there are accounts, quite numerous, of fairies from different regions competing against each other to secure resources. This ties a little bit also into the aspect of fairies as groups of fairies protecting specific human communities and on rival position with other groups of fairies who are protecting a different group of people, different community. Ties a little bit into their relationship to nature without being spirits of nature per se, but their ability to influence weather, cattle, fertility, crops. And then competing, it's like stealing someone else's luck. It's like luck runs in limited supplies and supply, and somebody needs to go there and steal some from the neighbor and bring more into your own community. Which is something that I did encounter in Irish lore as well, about witches going to steal on someone else's luck and bring it into, their own life, their own household. So we do have the parallel between Irish fairies competing on a sport field, like hurling, and they really clash against each other, and it's fearsome to watch and participate. And then you have the fierce and fearsome battle in between this competition, in between Romanian fairy groups who are actually competing over resources, and the winner takes it all kind of thing. I'm not aware of many situations where it ends in a draw, or it ends like, okay, we're going to take only some but leave some. So usually it's the winner takes it all. So yes, the competitiveness is the common underlying theme, and now it takes different expressions because the cultures are different. And
one of the other things, or one thing I was familiar with, the term I was familiar with from your book, is the term of a hag. But there's an interesting fairy slant on the meaning of hag in your book, isn't there?
Oh, it is. I'm still researching and still trying to find out more on the hag aspect, because what we see in both Romanian and Irish fairy lore is this idea of, this aspect is not an idea, it's a very concrete aspect of relegation. And sometimes it may even appear as a demotion, but I do not like the term demotion because fairy beings, very powerful beings, are still powerful. So there is the aspect of deity, gods, goddesses, being at some point with the expansion of Christianity, with a change in understanding and the way people related to nature and to the divine. So this is aspect of relegation. So fairy queens, fairy kings, they don't just go away. They, gods and goddesses don't just go away. They become fairy kings and queens, and as such, they continue to live and exercise power in the new body of lore. So the hag, what I was able to gather from both Irish and Romanian fairy lore, is this very, very old ancient deity, so old that that's really hard to pinpoint the origin. We can figure out some of the aspects, what are her purviews. Wisdom, the wisdom that comes with old age, land forming, land shaping, the ability to not to reshape like the Cailleach, shaping, not dropping boulders in Ireland, and this one creating certain outcrops on a mountain peak in Romania when, according to the legend, she froze in this crouch position with her, herd of sheep. So land forming. It has connections with the forests, with the deep forests. I'm talking the Romanian part, where we have the old mother of the woods. And she's dangerous, but she's also she can be the bestower of knowledge and special powers on those who are daring yet respectful in their approach. It is very much as you would approach an elder teacher with respect. They know a lot, but they don't have an obligation to give that knowledge to you. You have to deserve it. So you have to present yourself as bold, intelligent, but also respectful. And be ready to give something in exchange, because like everything fairy related, there's no such thing as a free meal. You have to have something, that's worth exchanging for them to accept the trade. So hag, I take it to refer to the old, the ancient aspect. It also evokes this image of a rugged appearance, which kind of matches what we have when they describe the old mother of woods in Romania. Describe it as a hag, is this hag, this rugged appearance. But she can shapeshift and appear as a very beautiful young lady. Hag has acquired pejorative nuances with the old and the rugged fading into disfavor. It's more of a fashion, and then this strict dichotomy, everything that's old and rugged and has a whiff of threat to them, that's going to be bad. And then we encourage all these beautiful things because they're good. So it's dichotomy, good and bad, reflected also there, which, if you ask me, that's terribly wrong because beautiful things are equally dangerous.
I'm with you.
So aesthetics is whatever we understand by that, whatever our criteria are to label something beautiful or ugly. That's not the equivalent. We cannot put the equal sign between beautiful and good, not so great looking and bad. So that's not really. So that would be the hag in my book.
Yeah, it's got hag has a bit of a reputation, modern reputation to the word, hasn't it? It is that people think it's a bad thing. Not always the case. Crone,
this age evoking, and yes, that's all. I mean, that's fairy. The degree of danger, the ominous, it's always going to be there. It doesn't matter whether it's hag or shiny golden looking maiden.
So beware of shiny golden maidens and hags. You never know. Now, one thing I do have to mention is dragons. You have dragons in your book, and they are very dear to my heart. Dragons in a book on fairies. Why are they there?
For a number of reasons. So dragons are very special with me because it is a type of energy that, I don't know, held an appeal to me since I was a child. Now, parallel between Irish and Romanian fairy lore, dragons do not have a good reputation in the lore. So dragons are described as fearsome, destructive, unleashed forces of nature that really takes both Irish and Romanian stories tell the same thing. It takes a very smart human, very smart person, because they cannot be overcome by just physical force alone. So I really like how this shows up in both cases, because without dragons, without that challenge, without the threat they pose, that human, the protagonist of the story, would never come up with that ultimate, spark, brilliant spark of an idea on how to overcome something that seems to be impossible to overcome. So they bring this challenge that ultimately, the necessity is mother of invention. So ultimately forces the human protagonist to grow. I see it very much as an initiatory, because you really have to move to the next level of your human capacities to match the abilities and what a dragon represents. I also like to look, and this is outside both Romanian and Irish lore, I also like to look at other cultures, how dragons are represented. And we have in Asian context dragons as embodiment of wisdom. And that there's also a more benevolent streak to them there, where they appear as wise counselor and guides for the humans. We also have in Romanian fairy lore, there are a couple of examples where actually the dragons end up giving some priceless advice to the human protagonist. So there is that aspect to them, and I thought to include them in a book of fairies because they appear in Irish lore, not necessarily very connected, but there is one tale where actually a dragon emerges from the cave of Cruachan. And the cave of Cruachan, Cruachan, is that cave is known in Irish lore as an entrance to the other world, also as an entrance to fairy realms. So being that emerges from there could be, I'm not saying yes, it is, but could be also related to fairy worlds, much as it is to the lore, because it appears in a story, in the lore. As far as in the Romanian, there's hardly any story about fairies. I'm not talking lore, I'm talking about fantasy or leaning more into fantasy. But nevertheless, those stories have at their core seeds of real beliefs. So it's a reworking of real beliefs, and very old beliefs, into more fantasy-like entertainment, teaching purposes story. And there's hardly one of those without a dragon to challenge the protagonist and help them, either gifting them something or, for most part, challenging them. Again, the aspect of sports, the aspect of excelling into some tasks, outpowering the dragon in some ways so they can go on their quest. So yeah, dragons, they have a place in fairy lore. And I'm sure they have more connections than this.
I'm all up for dragons anywhere. Yeah, I do. I see dragons as otherworldly. They're an energy, they're a power, aren't they? And I think if you had to put them under a title, then otherworldly is as good as any. But yeah, I'm rooting for the dragons always. You've mentioned about people in the stories and gaining wisdom, and we can learn a lot from folklore, can't we? And I think it's lovely to have all of that folklore to learn about the fairy world from. There are cautions, though, aren't there? I think with most of these fairy stories, tales, if people want to start working with fairy, there are some cautions around it, aren't there?
Yes. If somebody would start to work with fairies, I would say start with an open mind and with a cautious heart. So open minds allows to see the magic in the mundane. We tend to put like a strict dichotomy. This is magic, this is the mundane. But there is magic in the mundane, in the simple occurrences of everyday
Yeah, absolutely.
life. You don't have necessarily to travel to faraway places like, oh, I cannot connect to the Irish fairies because I cannot go, to Ireland, or I don't live in Ireland. So the open-mindedness invites to spot and sense the fairy presence in the very space that you are. So no need to undertake anything impossible to actually start on a fairy path. With this in mind, starting on a fairy path should begin with reading the lore. As I said, I'm here in the United States, and we have the example of fairy from different cultures appearing, emerging, interacting with people in the United States. So fairies are not connected to the geography. So you can interact with the Norse Alfar, you can interact with the Irish she can interact with various types of fairy beings, even if you're across the ocean and far away from Europe, where, the cultures where they originated. Why am I mentioning this as such an important aspect for anybody who begins to work with fairy beings? We have these fairies from the outside coming in, acclimating, becoming of the place. But we also have the fairy beings who were here on this land from before the arrival of Europeans to North America. So it is important for anybody starting on this path, and parentheses, everywhere in Europe, with population migrating all across, and us living in a world where communication and transportation is increasingly easier, wherever you are, pay attention of who was there before, learn their lore, make sure you show respect, announce to them your intention to work, let's say, with fairies from a different culture, and also study really, really well the lore, the folklore of the fairy beings from the culture that you're interested. For example, I'll take the Norse Alfar in my situation. I have to pay attention and pay respect to the beings who have been there on Native American land. I do not have a call, a deep felt need or desire to work with them, but I'm acknowledging them. They're my neighbors. They have been there for long before my house was built. So I talked to people from the native culture, announcing I do not intend, to be like part of your culture. I don't make any such claims. I do not want to teach anybody about what your culture is, because that's the people whom I talk to. So their thing is closed. But I want to be respectful and don't do anything that would show disrespect to the land spirits and to those beings that are very similar to fairies in my culture. And they're like, oh, sure, no problem. This is what they like. And they told me, leave out some tobacco, leave out some cornmeal. In the meantime, by the way, the Alfar took a liking to tobacco too. We'll come back to that in a second. So leave out some cornmeal, fresh water, and no alcohol in the places where, you have, because we have some groups have, please don't leave out alcohol. Some others don't. So I was talking to someone from the farther northern United States who said, oh, we don't have a problem. We can pour alcohol. Again, people from like native people, we don't have a problem with that. So it depends. It's regional. Learn the lore of your local area. And then interacting with my Alfar, they said, okay, we would like this, and this for offerings, learning their lore, having them around, and they do like alcohol. So I found a way, I found a place. So they have a dedicated space in my backyard where I know, so I'm leaving offerings for the spirits who are native to the land and to the Native American cultures. I'm leaving offerings farther away from them. They have a tree and they like that. And for in the space that I set up, and I invited there, hey, this is your space, this is your offering stone, this is, so if you like that liquor, if you like that little bit of wine, if you like that beer, it's here. So yeah, if it's spirits, it goes on the stone. So I'm not pouring it straight to the root of any kind of plant. So pouring it on the stone, it will evaporate or be enjoyed. If it's wine or beer, actually that goes really well into the ground for the plant. It actually feeds the tree. So learn the lore. This is the first step. And then build your own personal experience. See who's coming, meditation. Learn some form of meditation. And in that quiet space, that's where these beings begin to speak, and learn to discern your own voice and your own self-fulfilling prophecies, your own wishful, not self-fulfilling prophecies, what am I talking about? Your own wishful thinking, to separate that from the messages that you are getting from genuine beings.
But you've now got Scandinavian elves hooked on tobacco.
I thought I'm the only one, and then I was participating at a conference in Dortmund months ago, and somebody else mentioned, oh yeah, they like tobacco, and I'm like, oh, sure, that must be a thing then. I'm not the only one. It's raw tobacco, like unprocessed, just the leaves, tobacco leaves. So it's not. Yeah, no, I'm not teaching them how to smoke. They're
bad habits.
Yeah. They're actually not keen, from my own interaction. They're actually not keen on the smoking thing. I think they would be quite upset if I would. So I don't smoke, by the way. So they would be quite upset if I would. So not doing it.
I'd never made that would never have occurred to me to give an offering of tobacco. So that kind of highlights. I think that goes the same with any land spirits, fairy world deities. It's about doing your research, isn't it? It's about doing your homework.
I think it's a little bit like dealing with people. You have somebody who, let's say, has dietary restrictions, and you want to surprise them, and you bring them that almond cake when they're severely allergic to cake. What does it show? You didn't really put enough thought in the gifts that you're offering. Yeah, it looks pretty, but did you really pay attention to what they need or what they actually want and like? So, it's no different.
Can't imagine being allergic to cake. No, that would be the end.
I don't even want to go there. Let's
not even think about that. Now, a term that you also use, and I have seen it used before, is fairy doctors. What does being a fairy doctor mean?
I think it acquires different meanings, because we have here fairy doctor, and we have fairy witch, and we have fairy seer, which at their root could be like a common denominator. Everybody, they're talking about a human dealing with fairies or fairy created problems. A fairy doctor, as I gather it from Irish tradition, is a person who is capable of helping, assisting humans with problems created by fairies, like fairy-induced disease, whether in humans or in cows, in cattle. So that would be a fairy doctor. Now the paradox, these fairy doctors sometimes get their knowledge from their fairy familiars. So you have a fairy familiar who actually comes and tells you, hey, you have to use this herb and water, use it in this way, and you say this charm, and then you go and you sprinkle or whatever. And that's going to counteract the power of the spell that the other fairy put on your cows or on your child or something, on your spouse. And it's very interesting because this reinforces the idea that you cannot, when you say fairy, you cannot really paint with a super wide brush. There are conflicts of interests even between them. Somebody, curses your cows, and then another fairy comes in and says, hey, this is how you counteract the curse that, or the disease that other fairy, the neighboring fairy has inflicted. So I found this to be fascinating, and goes back to what I just said, and I will die on that hill. No pun intended. That fairy hill. Telling people, read the lore, and read not only the broad, what is, like more characteristic of the culture, but to get as much as you can into the regional, what's happening in your area. Because fairy doctors, they tend to be like specialized. They tend to be specialized in like one area, each area having like having had once upon a time their own fairy doctor or fairy witch. And a fairy witch can also be a fairy doctor. I think that's ambiguity in between how these role actually split. I don't think they really split completely. Like, if you're a witch, you cannot be a doctor.
Oh, that makes sense. That's a good term. Yep, that makes sense. So if we can move on now to your fairy herbs and fairy magic, more focused on the practical fairy magic and all of the herbs that come under fairy magic as well. Was that just the logical next step to write that book?
That book comes from the place, write the book you wish to read. In my research, so that I have, as soon as I got my author copies, one of them landed on my desk, and I'm using it quite often because it saves me the hassle to piecemeal everything. When, as I said, my path lies on this cross, this crossroad, this intersection in between the Norse and the Irish, Scandinavian and the Irish fairy traditions. So there is a tinge of the she. So when I'm in Ireland, I need to know how to interact, how to be respectful, because they're there. I'm in their backyard, literally. But I'm bringing in with me my Scandinavian, my Alfar, my allies. So for those who have a more eclectic practice, a more eclectic approach to fairy work, I found no book, no resource that's 100% focused on this relationship in between fairies, again, the umbrella term, and herbs. And this is very important because sometimes the herbs that are propitiatory for some fairies are repelling or apotropaic for others. And the last thing that you'd want is to send your allies away and open the doors for exactly the ones that you want to keep away. It happened to me, learning from mistakes, and about that time, so many years ago, and I'm like, one day I am going to write that book. Now, I had to take off my heart other things like writing some autobiographical work, writing the parallels between Irish and Romanian fairy lore, because I believe that would be like a nice intro as to, hey, this is who I am and this is what my interests and qualifications are. And then go and write this book that actually took a long time to research, because yes, there is my gnosis, but my gnosis doesn't cover everything. And I try to make it as comprehensive as possible. There's over 40 herbs and trees, plus a section on water, plus a section on how exactly, like suggestions and how to use these in a very friendly manner for protection and cleansing and various abundance and various other purposes. So that's that, plus a thorough introduction to, thorough yet brief. The book is a non-intimidating, relatively short, easy read. Like, I would like to have it, it's a resource, I'm grabbing it and I'm looking into it, looking it up. So there is there a meditation for somebody who is fairly new to fairy work. There are recommendations in the meditation how to connect over this specifically aspect of receiving guidance from your own fairy familiar or fairy guide. How am I supposed to work with herbs in a way that's not going to rub you the wrong way. So you, my fairy guide, is not going to rub you the wrong way. And a little bit of the history, because it may look or feel kind of new age. Oh, this is a modern thing, fairy and herbs. And no, let's look into the tradition of fairy witches and fairy doctors and fairy seers over the past few hundreds of years, and see that actually this is a cultural practice with very deep roots and with very practical outcomes, because it saved lives as it results from the stories being told about this, this fairy herbalism tradition. So yeah, this is how the book came about.
Is that how you discovered the fairy herbs from folklore? I mean, what makes a particular herb a fairy herb?
That's a question that I had for my grandmother, because she used, fairy herbs. Like the exact translation in Romanian would be the same, herbs, fairy herbs. Like, what exactly do you mean? What are those fairy herbs? And she named a few. And then she said, well, there are herbs that attract fairies. They are known to bless these herbs. And on specific holidays, we have in Romania specific holidays that are still acknowledged in the church calendar as fairy holidays, under the name fairy holiday. So fairies, they have an affinity for certain herbs whom they bless. And obviously, an herb that a fairy blesses, it's not an herb that a fairy would feel repelled or repulsed by. Therefore, it's something of their liking, and they bless it for humans to use for magical purposes, but also herbal healing. There are also herbs that fairies are known to have an affinity for, in the sense that you put these herbs around, or you diffuse this fragrance around that would make a certain space appealing to them. And this comes from the lore, from folklore, but also from people's personal experience, their gnosis. You notice that you use a certain herb and then you have a fairy response. So then you can go, there are several ways how to do this. You go and check, and you may get, actually I came because it felt good. The space felt good for ritual or whatever. So I came around. And there is another category that I would also call fairy herbs. Herbs that fairies themselves would tell practitioners to use to heal certain ailments. So when I'm thinking of, there is fairy magic as the magic practiced by the fairies, and there's fairy healing as the healing practiced by the fairies, and there is the fairy magic as the magic taught by a fairy to a human practitioner, or fairy healing as intended as the healing as taught by a fairy familiar to the human practitioner. So I would include herbs given by a fairy familiar or ally to a human. You take this and you use it to heal this ailment. I also put that under the umbrella with the mention, how it came about as a fairy herb in my book. I would include that as well among fairy herbs. So attracting, repelling, and those indicated by the fairies themselves to be used in healing or magic.
Now, you mentioned water, and I know you've got a section in the book on what, that's quite random because it's not a herb. What's the connection with the fairy and water and working fairy magic with it?
So if we go to, again, lore and folklore, we see the connection of fairies with specific wells. We have in Ireland, there's a well known to, I believe Queen Eva has her own sacred well. In Romania, we find fairies gathering at the well and blessing the waters. We have, both in Ireland and Romania and in Scandinavian lore, we have fairies on the morning of Midsummer, St. John's the Baptist Day, so the night before, they are blessing the fields. And in the morning, the dew forming on plants, that carries the energy of the fairy blessing. Same around Bjaltuna, around May Day, when the night before, fairies in passing, they bless. And then the herb, people walk, the dew forming on earth. People walk the next morning barefooted or even roll their kids in the dew for health purposes. We have fairies in charge or overseeing bodies of water and springs. Therefore, those waters, some of them are known for their healing powers. Well, aside from the mineral content present in some of them, in some others, they're just known without any kind of chemical change in composition that would explain the property. Some others are simply known for their healing properties because of the fairy or plant spirit associated with it. My grandmother used to use rainwater a lot in her preparations and, tinctures or water rainwater wasn't for tinctures. Don't do that. So rainwater for infusing, herbs, and then using it to sprinkle around to clean a space or to bless a space. And water is everywhere, and the herbs that you're using to infuse, they're fairy herbs in this set of, circumstances. So I don't think you would want to put something that's very unfriendly or disconnected from and mix, the fairy herbs with that. So I think that was a little bit on my mind. Try to bring as much cohesiveness into everything I do. The water, as I said, it has alleged connection to fairies and to the Lord. So there's more in the chapter in the book about why water is so important and the power of intent and what we think and how our body is, significant percent. Some say 60, 70, 90. I'm not a jellyfish. I'm not 90% water for sure. So, but significant percentage of our body is made of water. So I thought that's important to know and to bring. That's how you make your most of your mixtures. You're not just going to throw herbs around. You're either going to burn or spray or, water to cleanse your ritual space or your house or yourself. So thought it's important.
So to finish up, I'm going to ask you what your favorite fairy herbs are that you use. Do you have favorites?
Complicated.
Big question.
I'm going to shoot quickly for two because they are even in my preferences. One of them is mugwort, and mugwort is known to repel everything that's my grandmother used to call them unholy. So everything that's good mugwort would allow it, but everything that's adversarial, everything that's ill-meaning, mugwort would repel it. And we used to have mugwort. She used to make like little bundles of mugwort for me to sleep under, have under the pillow. Burning mugwort. So she had the impression at some point that there was a fairy being around me that wasn't necessarily of the goodly inclined kind. So I was decked in mugwort. I had mugwort in my pockets. I had wearing mugwort. She made something for me to wear. So yes. Story for another day, what happened from then. But yes, mugwort will repel everything that's unholy, ill-meaning, but allow other, beings to come nearby. And the other one is St. John's wort, which interesting because in Irish fairy lore, they say do not use St. John's wort because it's the Irish she do not like it. So I would not use St. John's wort while I am in Ireland. So it's like smoking in someone's house, knowing that they're not non-smokers. There are people who are not bothered by the smoke, go and smoke in theirs, not in the other people's house. in Romania, actually, that herb does not have a repelling connotation for all the fairy beings. There are some that are not really repelled, but not really invited either by it. But the other ones, known for their affinity for people and for them being goodly inclined toward people, those don't have an issue with this herb. And in Germanic folklore, so I prefer the name Suna word, which is an herb of the sun, a solar herb. It's a more Germanic name brought about by Baldwulf Gunderson, so writer on Germanic traditions. And I use that, and those among the Alfar with whom I am in partnership with, they love it. So I asked, and I have the green light for it. It's a very, very strongly cleansing, purifying, and it has this spark, joyful feel about it. So I like it very much. My favorite. My favorite.
No, I use mugwort the same. I put mugwort in my herb bundles for cleansing and purifying. It's excellent for that. And I would agree with the St. John's wort. It's very solar, fiery herb. Good choices. Excellent choice. So I've learned huge amounts today. Thank you so much for joining us. That's absolutely fascinating. And I'd never thought of the connections or the crossovers before. So it is brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me as your guest today. It's always so lovely speaking to you.
And we will see all of our viewers and listeners next time on the Pagan Portal Podcast. Thank you for joining us.
You have been listening to the Pagan Portal Podcast, a Moonbooks Publishing production. For more information, please visit our website.